In February of 2024, the United States Department of Agriculture, alongside the USDA Equity Commission, made nationwide headlines with the release of the Equity Commission final recommendations. A culmination of 2 years of work, 6 public meetings, and countless workforce hours from members and USDA staff across the country. A total of 66 recommendations have been presented to the department by the Equity Commission to help address discriminatory practices, closing the racial wealth gap, and addressing long-standing inequities in agriculture. Let us take a look back at the journey of USDA's Equity Commission. In January 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 13985 on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, and committed to the creation of an Equity Commission as part of his rural agenda.
At USDA, we base our equity effort on 4 very significant pillars. The first pillar is the establishment of an Equity Commission, 15-member commission taking a very specific and very deep dive look at USDA in an effort to try to determine what systemic barriers still exist with reference to our programs and the availability of those programs, and to make recommendations to root out those systemic barriers that do exist.
In September of 2021, USDA announced the intent to establish the Equity Commission and formally requested nominations for membership to the Advisory Committee and Subcommittee on Agriculture.
Sure. Here at USDA, we are serious about our efforts to end discrimination across all areas of the department and to improve access to services for those we serve. That is why we're creating an Equity Commission to hold us accountable and push us further into ensuring that all we do is fair and equitable.
In February of 2022, USDA officially launched the Equity Commission and virtually hosted the inaugural meeting of the Equity Commission and Agriculture Subcommittee. Between February and September of 2022, the Equity Commission held 3 public meetings where members presented and voted on recommendations for inclusion in the interim report.
My whole thing is lifting up the farmer, making sure that the farmer is valued for what he brings to the table. We as a commission and Ag Subcommittee can do a lot, but it's where the rubber meets the road with the farm workers and the farmers. My age-old thing, the trust, the transparency, and the transformation of all that we do.
The third public meeting was held in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, with the RCED and Agriculture subcommittees.
When you work in the Department of Civil Rights, when you work as a civil servant, you have a responsibility to serve the people with justice and equity. And so our role is to advocate for that.
In February 2023, the Equity Commission presented the interim report to the Secretary of Agriculture. The report included 32 actionable recommendations. Simultaneously, USDA released an official response to the Equity Commission's interim recommendations, which provided insight for how USDA will address the recommendations and equity concerns.
This report is very important to me personally and to our underserved and other represented communities together to make sure that these recommendations are implemented correctly, that all of us in different communities speak as one voice and fight as one body.
Chante washte, nape, chiuzapi, which means I greet you with a good heart.
In June and October of 2023, the Equity Commission held its 5th and 6th public meetings.
With the executive order and the statement equity for all, for us and for me, it meant meeting people where they are. And Executive Order 13985 has allowed this committee to stop asking the individual to overcome the structural.
Equity is for everyone. So often the lens is being painted as discrimination or minority-based, but it goes beyond that. It's serving everyone and making sure we all have a seat at the table.
We all bring a certain lens to this work, and that's incredibly valuable to bring and to have at the table at this moment. And having each other here to get to look through other people's lenses as a result of this collaboration is so powerful. It's going to make our work better. And the recommendations that you deliver to USDA will make USDA's work better.
Because the work of this commission was long overdue. And the recommendations that we will make a difference. And I believe change people's lives.
As a culmination of analysis of USDA programs and services, research and review of previous USDA commissions and reports, countless conversations with department staff, and welcome input of stakeholders spanning the country, the Equity Commission published and presented their final report on February 22, 2024.
So I'm proud today to accept this report. I'm even prouder to accept the challenge this report creates.
It's been clear to me from day one of this assignment that Secretary Vilsack and the entire leadership team are truly committed to advancing equity.
Today, I'm filled with hope and confidence that our seat at the table is secure and the needs and concerns of farm workers will be addressed.
Where we march toward equity with accountability, permanence, respect, dignity, all in the mix.
The final report is an attestation to the commitment of the Equity Commission and its Agriculture and Rural Community Economic Development subcommittees, and their expansive knowledge and expertise in how equity can be integrated so that all customers at USDA receive a fair shot at a prosperous and successful livelihood.
And I'm proud of the fact that this department has had the strength and the willingness and the guts to open itself up. But it is a beginning of a significant journey, one that is incredibly important, and one that not only can provide guidance for this department, but for the federal government and for all governments.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to the Rio Grande Valley, Texas McAllen. It really is an honor for me to be here. My name is Cecilia Hernandez, and I serve as the designated federal officer for our Equity Commission, which now, if you didn't know what it was about, you just got a 7-minute 101, and you should all be experts because we're going to ask you a lot of hard questions after this and at dinner. So with that, we're going to spend the next hour or 50 minutes really having a conversation with the Equity Commission members here, and then really open up to all of you so that you can also ask them questions. So I'm really going to try to keep this conversation short so that we can actually engage in a dialogue. And so with that, I first of all, I just want to thank the meeting organizers for helping us and for inviting us, the MCAT, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, the Institute for Ecology, Scholarships and Health, and the UTGRV Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Rural, what is it? Advancement. There you go. So thank you for those organizations for making all of this happen. And so, as you saw, the Equity Commission published their report with 66 recommendations to advance equity. And so at this point, what we're doing is we're on the road and we're conducting a series of regional convenings, which actually began last month in Detroit, Michigan, to really bring this report to life and really talk about the things that we're working at USDA and how we're partnering with the commission members and how we can continue to partner with all of you. And so I'm going to ask each of the members to introduce themselves, and then just a short statement of how this work has been different. So I'm going to start with you, David.
Well, hi everyone, my name is David Carrasquillo. I come from Puerto Rico. I'm the only member from not only Puerto Rico, but a territory. So even though this is a huge privilege, at the same time, it's a huge burden. in a sense that we don't have the same representation as the other states. So there's a lot of work that I have to throw under my shoulders that in many cases for other states it's done by elected people. So the journey that I've come to experience during this experience has been very surreal, but at the same time very nurturing for me and for the people around me and the island, because this is work that we've been waiting to happen for a long time, because there's a lot of discussions that this is the place to have them and to start conversations that will forever, at least, well, not forever, but it would take time to solve some issues that now we're engaging for the first time. So just want to share a little bit of the experience. My first meeting I missed because the same day that I was supposed to go to Arkansas, we had a hurricane. So my first meeting was remotely. I was in it remotely during a very hectic response day after a storm. So there's a lot of things that I'm very thankful for the space, because it takes a village to get things moving. And even though my experience as a Puerto Rican in the space is very surreal and very difficult to adjust, at the same time the people that were in the commission and the staffers have been very welcoming and very adjusting on the very uphill battle that is to first understand the context, which is really wildly different from Puerto Rico, in order to get things moving. And right now I feel very comfortable because everyone responds to emails, responds to calls, gets approached, and I feel like that there's a conversation going, a dialogue.
Thank you, David. Well, first of all, I need to clarify that I'm not a member of the Equity Commission. I just thought about that as we were sitting here with my new family here. I'm the inaugural Senior Advisor for Racial Justice and Equity, reporting to the Secretary of Agriculture. And in that role, I do have the privilege of working very closely with the Equity Commission, mostly as kind of a liaison, working with Cecilia as a DFO and her team, and making sure that the Equity Commission has access to USDA for whatever recommendations need to be fully vetted, flushed out, developed. And it's been really quite an experience in working with the Equity Commission. I think you asked a question about how this is a little different. The Equity Commission itself is different. I've had the pleasure of serving in a number of capacities at USDA. I've gotten more comfortable being an advocate, but I think this is the first time that I've ever been privileged with working with a group that has an executive order that actually establishes its existence. And when the President of the United States and then Congress comes in with first the American Rescue Plan and later the Inflation Reduction Act, and they say, yes, USDA, you will establish this Equity Commission. Here's some ground rules, but you will establish this, and this work is serious. One, it's properly resourced, right? Two, it captures a lot of attention, and people are watching and looking and listening and making sure that we have a firm understanding, that the Equity Commission has a firm understanding of what the issues are, and that's what makes this work different. The other thing that makes it a little different is you've heard throughout the importance of this work, the disparities that we're trying to address, but you also hear the word accountability and sustainability. And it's what are those things that we can do to make sure that the recommendations that we're making, those 66 with all the sub-recommendations, that they get done in a manner that's evident 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I think that's a big difference in this Equity Commission.
So, good afternoon. My name is Arturo Rodriguez, and I'm
the President Emeritus of United Farm Workers, and spent 45 years of my life working there. So Secretary Vilsack asked me to be a member, a co-chair of the Equity Commission, and I got to admit, when he first called me, I was skeptical about why is he asking me to be a co-chair of an Equity Commission. And the reality is that prior to Secretary Vilsack, the USDA never had anything to do with farm workers. And Secretary Vilsack, when he came into office under President Obama, he began to change that and demonstrate that the USDA was as much for farm workers as it was anybody in the agricultural industry, that they were a key stakeholder and their issues and needs had to be dealt with. And so when he invited me to be co-chair of the commission, he said, look, I want you there because I want to make sure that there are recommendations that are going to focus on the needs and issues that confront farm workers here in the United States. And as a result, I found that not only did Secretary Vilsack want that, but our designated federal officer, Cecilia Hernandez, was very committed to that. She had a fantastic team of folks working with her that also were committed in that particular way. We had Dr. Goldman as our consultant, I guess I'd say. But everybody, and especially the members of the commission, all of us were trying to make sure that this just wasn't another exercise, that this was going to be meaningful, that the time and energy we put into this and the resources were going to count, and that we could all feel proud of the time that we spent there and know that there was going to be a real effort being made by USDA and all of us to really ensure that these recommendations are implemented. And what I say is really different is the fact that Secretary Vilsack, USDA, they're not waiting, or they weren't waiting until we got through with the recommendations. As they heard them roll out, they already began implementing them. And we saw changes happen as a result of that. So that gave us all a feeling that this was something that was really worthwhile investing in. And I think we all truly feel that, and feel like we have done a service to our respective communities, but also partnered with USDA in a way that is going to create a new future, and a future that's going to be even more responsive to the stakeholders that within the agricultural industry. Thank you.
My name is Alex Rosellas. I am a professor here. These are all my students, so they all get an A. And so, you know, I remember getting this call from Cecilia and from the chief of staff, and Catherine, and inviting me to this commission, right? I mean, I was nominated in September or October, and I get a call in December as I'm visiting my mom and dad. And I was actually at Walgreens in a parking lot. It was late at night, picking it up and, you know, picking up some prescriptions from my parents. And I tell them, hey, I tell my dad, I said, hey, I got nominated to this commission. And, you know, it's interesting because if you've ever had conversations with your elders, it's hard to convey to them sometimes the excitement you have, right? I'll give you an example. I was at the White House at the last meeting, and I called my mom, I said, Mom, I'm at the White House as part of this Equity Commission. And the first question she asked me is, did you eat? And we were underserved at the event. And she's like, oh, they didn't feed you at the White. So it's that I wanted to just tell you those stories is because I am an immigrant to this country, and you know, it's an important role, I think, and a privilege to be on this commission, especially with this, you know, distinguished panel of folks that you see in front of you. And I can say that because each of those folks brought this real important worldview to the commission that I do believe represented the United States as we know it, right? As I know it. And, I think that Dr. Goldman will tell you, I was one of the early questioners, if that's the right word. It actually was a smart move, because several of the first meetings I had was outside at the farm. And if you ever try to have a meeting outside in May here in the Rio Grande Valley, you're like, let's get it done, because everyone's hot, we're tired, we're busy, and we want to make sure that the work that we do is meaningful, right? And you remember some of those early conversations. I called out the US. I'm a former USDA employee. I worked for the agency on 2 different occasions. And I loved my time there. And I know how hard it is to make sure that the People's Department is in fact the department for everyone. And but I wanted to make sure that the work of all of our predecessors, and you guys must know this, but there had been a dozen commission before us who've been asked to do the same task. And I wanted to say, I told Dr. Goldman, I don't want to ask for the same exact thing that everyone else asked for. I want to see, first of all, what you have done to address and honor my elders, and make sure that that work that they did has paved the way for the rest of us. And we're going to ask you some harder questions, right? And Dr. Goldman and my colleagues, I think they put us all at ease. I started to take the meetings inside, which helped a lot. And I must say that the 2 years I've served on the panel, as somebody who is a potential recipient of, and also a accomplice of the U.S., we are doing the department's job, right? We are helping the department do their job. We, as in U.S. UTRGV, we as people who I represent and who I identify with, we are doing some very important work, and we definitely need everyone's help. And for those of you guys who know me, I never turn away anyone who wants to help us do this work, and because we need everyone. And so I feel very privileged to be on this panel. And for those of, a lot of you guys know, I mean, I'm going to tell my mom about it, and she's going to ask me if we ate, right? And so it's really about people, and it's been a privilege to serve on this committee. And so I'd like to thank you all for inviting me.
My name is Valerie Beal. I am a member of the Rural Community Economic Development Committee. Originally, I was put on the committee because I had worked 28 years in the banking field, doing a lot of really unusual lending in Indian country, and also with the local farmers and ranchers, and I had a lot of experience with the FSA and the USDA. However, after being selected for the committee and seeing the potential of what the USDA could do, I went out on my own and started my own committee, or my own business. And I feel my focus for the Equity Commission is to help small communities. I come from a town of 1,600 people, so we all know each other. Farmers, ranchers, small businesses, the tribal members that I represent. I'm not an enrolled member, but my grandson is, and I tell you what, if I'm a mama bear for my son, for my grandson, I'm going to be 10 times the mama bear, and I want to see changes happen on our local reservations, but also on reservations throughout the United States. I've also did some work with the small Hispanic populations that we have in our community. It's just very important to me that people know what the USDA can do for them. And I know that part of our training that we went through is that we were exposed to all of the USDA programs, and it's so vast, and there's so many ways that they can help you. But one of the questions we kept asking is, how do we get it to people? How does my neighbor know that they can qualify for this program or for that program? How, because we have wonderful USDA employees throughout the United States who are trying to do their very best, but they have a lot of programs and they don't have a lot of time. So how can we knock down the barriers for my Native American customers to be able to access the same programs that my Caucasian customers can? And so that was our challenge, I think, when we were looking at how not only do we figure out ways to compensate for previous shortcomings, how do we make it better going forward? It has been a real pleasure to be on the Equity Commission. DFO Hernandez, Dr. Goldman, they have been amazing to work with. We have such fine people on our group. I'm not sure I quite fit in because they're all much smarter than I am, but it's been such a pleasure. And the thing that surprises me, because I've served on other federal committees before, is how truly responsive the USDA has been to things that we've maybe not even proposed, maybe not even recommended. They've been responsive to conversations we've had over lunch and in the hallway and sometimes even in the bathroom. And it has been amazing what they have done with our rough ideas to try to make it better for everyone. And that's what's so amazing. And that's where I hope our future opportunities come with the Equity Commission. Thank you.
Well, I know it's getting kind of late, and I know some of you may be a little hungry. I have prepared questions for all of you, but Dr. Rosales, you're the first one that I have a question for. But my first pre-question is, do you want me to ask you my question, or would you actually prefer if someone else asked you a question from the audience?
Let's go with door number 2.
Door number 2. Okay, yes. Sorry, can you just, we're getting the mic right now. Just to make it a little livelier, engage the audience.
We didn't practice this. So.
I know, but remember what I said?
Cecilia?
For everyone, what are some recommendations that you had to dial back? For what reason? Maybe you were a little bit too optimistic, and in 10 to 20 to 25 years when you said we would see the fruits of your labor, do you think those recommendations could be made then? And what work needs to be made?
Samantha, that's a hard question. I've said this in the public meeting. There is Dr. Brunna, who was a co-chair for a long time. She challenges all of us to be as bold as we can be. And I think sometimes when you get caught up in needs, deficiencies, when you get caught up on what we think we need, there's like a moment there where you just need an immediate response. And that's important, right? But I think that there was a difficult, in my experience, it was difficult to try and balance the needs that we have in our communities with trying to build on a platform of strengths and assets that we have. I mean, I think I can say this, that for those of you who are the first time in the Rio Grande Valley, you realize that this is a community, a vibrant place where we have a bunch of organizations that are working hard on all these programs, right? And trying to be visionary, to be bold and make recommendations that lead to systemic change and not just to address an immediate need, right? There are some recommendations we make. I mean, there have been some recommendations made over history where the USDA is like, oh, we can do that. We can knock down the colored only sign over the bathroom in the USDA building. That's an easy recommendation. But to get to some of the deeper issues that we face in our community, that can also best leverage the assets that we already have? Those are harder questions to answer. Like, how do we make it easier for farmers to be successful while also making it easier for farm workers to have economic mobility? That's a hard question. There's a lot of money focused on making it better so that farmers have a better economic outcome, but we want to do it in a way that also makes it better for farm workers and food workers. That's a hard question. And I can tell you that it was very difficult for us to balance the immediate needs of people on the commission who are advocating for their own communities that have pressing needs, and then trying to also balance it with kind of a broader vision for our food system. Now, I worked on a number of different sections of the of the Equity Commission report. And I worked on those because I think they intersect, right? And I have a little bit of expertise and lived experience to be able to advocate for some of those folks. So, you know, as much as I've worked on some of the sections around research and education programs to make sure that we, we reach students and communities that USDA wants to reach, I felt compelled to work with Co-Chair Rodriguez because some of the issues that he advocates for are the same issues that we face here in the Valley, right? I mean, I would say that 20, 30, maybe 40% of the students in the Rio Grande Valley come from colonias, right? And we want to make sure that our students and their families have the same opportunity that everyone else has in the United States. And so to be able to advocate and build a vision around strengthening research and extension programs that are here in the equity report, we also had to think about other issues. And that's really hard. It's really hard because we have 40 voices all yelling at once, when I think what we needed to do was and what we end up doing at the very end was, Co-Chair Rodriguez and Co-Chair Cousins, they were the conductors, and they said, look, we have to sing together here, and that was the hard part. That was the hard part when we all, and then thank you to the USDA team of trying to kind of bring it all together, because I think at some moment, even in the early working, in the late stages, we were still kind of singing our own song. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Co-Chair Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you the same sort of question. Would you like to go with my question, or would you like to take
Audience.
a question? Oh, there you go. Okay. Did you have your hand? Okay. And would you mind your name and organization? Just so that
my name is Tania Chavez. I am the President and Executive Director of La Unión del Pueblo Entero Lupe. Can you hear me? Arturo is actually our chair and former chairman of the C4 Lupe Loads entity. So super well worked. Is that? Yeah, it's on. Thank you. My question is around, I think you are making very bold statements with access to affordable housing and drainage and water waste infrastructure, which is a lot. I think in the Spanish one it says garantizar, which is to guarantee affordable housing and drainage. And that is music to my ears, especially because the work that we do in the colonias is really hard to get the affordable housing that we need, and it's really, really hard to really fix the drainage issue that we have in all of the Rio Grande Valley. The biggest roadblock that we have encountered has been drawing either funds to the Rio Grande Valley or really getting the county government or local entities to help us support in this work. So my question is, what is the plan of the commission to bring local government entities to the fold to ensure that the guarantees that you're promising are actually going to come to fruition?
Tanya, let me just say first, there are no guarantees in any of this. But I think what's happened with the recommendations and the work the commission has done is they've opened the doors to a lot of different opportunities that we have and that we need within our respective communities in dealing with issues like colonias and farm workers and all the other inequity issues in terms of distribution of funding and sitting on county committees and how do we get diversity there, all those kinds of issues. We all know that we face them in our respective areas and we've had to deal with them. And I think the commission, we've made a number of recommendations to begin to deal with some of those issues. And we have a lot of confidence that at least the people that are there right now want to make every effort possible to begin to deal with them. And we've seen some results already. As I mentioned earlier, that they didn't wait. USDA did not wait until we got through with our recommendations. But I'll just share one particular program that was done with farm workers. We went to USDA, a number of different organizations, to share that, you know, when disasters happen, catastrophes happen, climate-wise or any other-wise in agricultural communities, there's always money for employers made available through different kinds of programs and so forth. But when it comes to the farm workers, there was nothing. And we had to fight. And in the end, all we'd end up was maybe with some food and be able to give them food. But they had to pay rents and deal with all the other bills and all the other issues that their families confronted. And so without us telling them exactly what needed to be done, they decided, well, the pandemic, that was an issue that really impacted farm workers in this country as much as anybody else. And they were clearly frontline workers. And so the Secretary Vilsack and the rest of the commission designed this particular program called the Farm and Food Workers Relief Grant. And for the first time ever, USDA was providing direct money to farm workers in this country by working with organizations throughout the country that had access to farm workers and would ensure that the monies would get to the farm workers and that they would fight the fraud and so forth. And that was just not farm workers, it was food workers as well. People that worked in packing sheds and meat packing plants and so forth. And so that was a clear signal that by having the discussions we've been having over the last 2 years, that we were expressing some of the real needs and some of the concerns and so forth, and that we needed USDA to be responsive, and they chose to do so. So I think that's, with the whole Colonia situation, I mean, it's been going on for generations. It's not something that just started, just like with farm workers, just like with minority farms, farm owners, and so forth. And so we have to figure out, okay, how can USDA really play an active role in dealing with those particular issues and working with the folks that are there, and to figure out the solutions. And again, with the team, with DFO Hernandez and with the team that she has, but with all of the leadership within USDA, we all have a sense there's a real commitment there to deal with these particular issues so that we're not just spinning our wheels again, but in fact, we're bringing home solutions for our respective communities.
Yes, it's a yes.
I just wanted to mention to Tanya and Ms. Chavez, as a commission, we only make recommendations to the People's Department, right? And that's why you heard about my hesitancy, because I don't want to just make a recommendation that everyone else has made over the last 40, 50 years. Now we have the USDA here, and they're willing to listen. And this is for when the people can start to articulate to the department on this is what we need, and this is, and you tell us how we can get it, right? like, and this is part of why we're having this event, is because, you know, I thought to myself, if only there was a way for us to bring the people to the People's Department. And this is why the Equity Commission is doing these regional rollouts, because they need to hear from the communities. What are their specific needs? And which of these recommendations do we really need to pursue that make the most impact in some of the communities that need it most, right? And that's what Secretary Vilsack said. He's like, we're here to help communities that need it most. Now, if that's your voice, we need to sing in chorus, right? And so this is where, I think, I want to just remind the audience is that for us, we cannot guarantee anything as a commission. We can just push as much as you can push the department to move in that direction. So, but it's important to ask the question.
Thank you. And I just want to follow up actually with Member Beal, because Member Beal, you've just stated that you've been working with communities. I mean, now with what Tanya is asking from the Lupe organization, what are ways that you've continued to or will work with your communities, with your local government, as you continue this work now with all of the information that you have now, engaging with the Equity Commission and with USDA?
There is a tremendous number of funds available for low-income housing through the USDA, both for individuals and also for community groups. There are also some alternatives that we could talk about after we get done here that have worked really well in my community to provide housing for people who don't qualify for traditional lending products. There's a lot of thinking outside the box, but I would encourage all of you to get in touch with the USDA's RD committee person. That they are remarkable people. They have a wide number of resources and they want to help you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go with David. Do you want a question from the audience? Yes? Okay. Yeah, you could go. She had her.
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Elizabeth Rodriguez Marquez, and I wanted to thank Arturo Rodriguez, first of all, because I worked on the one-time relief program for farm workers. And we issued it out during the seasons when they weren't working, when work was minimizing. And they were so grateful because, you know, most of them didn't get anything during the pandemic, any type of stimulus. You know, they still ask us, is there gonna be another one? You know, because they really do appreciate it and they use every single penny, you know. But my question is, in regards to what kind of recommendations did your committee make when it comes to immigration reform? Because we know that the dynamics of farm workers is changing, and we have less and less migrant farm workers. We have more and more seasonal farm workers, and we have an increase in H-2A workers that are not meeting the needs of the farmers, the growers, right? And we need real immigration reform, right? And how can we also support those efforts?
Dr. Goldman, will you like to take it, or Arturo? Yeah, either, both of you.
So specifically, Elizabeth, you want to know about how USDA is dealing with the immigration issue as well as H-2As? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it might kind of shock people, but actually Secretary Vilsack has been a real advocate for immigration reform for farm workers. And I have personally seen Secretary Vilsack convene meetings between Republican legislators, Democratic legislators, and this was when we've been very much, I should say, the United Farm Workers have been very much engaged in trying to sit down with the ag industry and figure out the principles around immigration reform that would cover both H-2A workers and domestic workers. And we have gone to Secretary Vilsack many a time to ask him to bring the parties together, since he definitely can do much, bring the employer side together much easier than what we can. And he has been very willing to do it. And so we've sat down in meetings where he's advocated for it. He knows and understands very much the legislation. The last piece of legislation that we had on the table in the House of Representatives, and where it was passed twice, was the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And Secretary Vilsack was very clear to the employers that this gives you an opportunity to deal with some of your issues, as well as we as farm worker organizations felt that we were dealing with the issues that were important to not only domestic workers, but to protect the rights of H-2A workers, guest workers in our country. And for whatever reason, the agricultural industry did not agree in the end in regards to being able to resolve it. But even since then, as recently as 2 months ago, I think, in the state of Maine, Secretary Vilsack was meeting with employers there, and they brought up the issue about access to labor and not having enough labor available for their particular crops in that area. And he sat back and he did not hesitate to tell those employers and those grower associations there, he said, you know what, you had an opportunity to sit down and resolve this issue and to deal with it, and you chose not to. So you better decide if it's that important to you that in fact you should do it. So they, even though they can't, USDA cannot write legislation and so forth, but they can be helpful in trying to bring all the stakeholders within the ag industry in terms of resolving it. And there's other programs that they've designed to be able to deal with H-2A workers to make sure that the regulations and the protections that in fact exist get extended to them. And one is being done right now, piloted, with H-2A workers coming from Central America. And it's very innovative, very creative in terms of what they're putting together. And we'll see. We'll see what the results are in the end. But thank you.
Thank you. I think yeah.
Hi, thank you all so much. My name's Sabrina, and I'm a young land steward. I just have to say thank you to the panel for this openness and this ability to participate more so with the audience. My question, I believe, maybe is to Ms. Beal. Given the history of South Texas and border territory, has any equity work been done specifically regarding retribalizing people? And are there USDA programs specifically considering the unique conditions that are accessible to detribalized indigenous communities?
That's a great question, Sabrina. There actually have been some programs to try to increase indigenous practices back into tribal grounds. There has been a big push through the FSA to use different collateral than what has traditionally been used. I come from a reservation where marijuana is legal, which has been a really interesting experiment to watch between the federal government, the USDA, and banks, and the tribe. However, there is a huge hemp production going on on our reservation, but there are other sorts of reintroduction. I believe, aren't you working on bringing buffalo back to your area? Okay. We have seen that too, and we've also seen the USDA be more open to those type of products and to more traditional methods of production. It's not an overnight. there's some pushing that goes on occasionally, and at least in my area. But I know that the USDA has been really generous with trying to help at least the one or two tribes that I work with to make up for things that may have not been given attention in the past. I know that just recently there was $35 million given to them to help with their communication systems so that they're on a level playing field with everyone else in the state of South Dakota. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I do think that there has been a big push. Two of our members of the Equity Commission one was from South Dakota and one was from Minnesota, and had much deeper roots in the indigenous culture than I have. And I feel like there were at least 6 proposals that 6 recommendations that came through the Equity Commission that tried to enhance indigenous priorities.
Thank you, and we can follow up with you with more information. Yeah, we do have time for probably 2 more questions. Just making sure that that everyone has voices. I'm going to go to the people that haven't asked questions before I go back. Yes.
I would like to know how the USDA is addressing the fact that there are some places here in the United States that they are highly productive and they have a wide variety of produce, but at the same time they're experiencing food desert conditions.
You're sending that to me and not the Equity Commission. So my name is Stacy Dean. I work over the Food and Nutrition Service at USDA, which is the mission area that's responsible for providing food support. And I think the issue you raise, which is that both the areas and the people that are working to produce our food are in fact, there you go. All right, the areas and the people that are producing the food are some of those that are struggling the most with food insecurity, but also nutrition insecurity. The food that is often available isn't food that supports good health and well-being. So we are working to do a better job on that, and I'll just tick off 4 things the way we think about it, and we have a whole day tomorrow committed to this issue. One is we have to make sure that, so I think the Equity Commission is focused very much on the workers having a bigger stake and a bigger slice of the economy, the food economy, as they deserve. On the food assistance side, we want to make sure that the support we're offering is meaningful, that so it's driven by science, and that actually is enough assistance to afford a basic diet. We want to make sure there are more connections to healthy food and producers, so that we're offering kinds of assistance that where individuals can purchase, let's say, fruits and vegetables at a farmer's market. We're making connections there on healthy food. We're working through partnership, through organizations like some of whom are here, which is on making sure that people know about nutrition assistance and healthy food. And then last, equity has to drive through it all. People who just going back to your original point, the people who experience food insecurity, it's not an equally shared burden. Communities of color have twice the rates of food insecurity as their white counterparts. So we can't just seek to lower food insecurity, we have to close the gap, and that is fundamental to all of our work. But it all comes back to the upstream problem of we don't want anyone to experience food insecurity, and that has to do with the wages and disparity in the labor market and redlining and all the other things that drive us to situations for disparity. So it's a big problem, but we're working on it. But thank you for raising it.
Thank you, Deputy Undersecretary Stacy Dean. And then I'm going to go for the last question. I see you're back there.
Thank you so much. My name is Carolina. I work with the National Young Farmers Coalition. Is it okay if I stand? Yeah. Okay. I have the great pleasure of working with farmers and advocates and organizers to get farmers into agriculture and to keep farmers in agriculture for the next generation. Y'all have had the pleasure of working with my colleague, Michelle Hughes. And, you know, I think one of the first recommendation that I saw, I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, I just got it in my hands, is to institutionalize equity into the work of the USDA. The sands are shifting, the political sands are shifting, and might not be as friendly as all of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years or so. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about how we build equity into the DNA of the USDA, where we might not have such friendly leadership for these kinds of policies and programs. And I would love to hear about what that's going to look like moving forward. Thank you.
I'm going to actually respond to that one because it's been my job for the past 2 years to not only work with them so that the commission writes the recommendations, but then, okay, so what am I going to do afterwards, right? I mean, USDA is a huge organization with over 100,000 employees. We're at every county. So how do we actually make this work stick, right? And so I'm a government bureaucrat, right? I'm going to establish processes across all of the agencies. And I mean, I will say that no matter what happens, this work is going to evolve, right? This work is going to mature. And we're already seeing that internally. We're at 2 years ago, we were still trying to figure it out. Now we have a lot more data. We have a lot more data. And we have a lot more data that actually, we don't have to use whatever word, right? We can use other terminology. We don't have to use the word equity. We can really talk about sort of just making this a service for everyone, reducing burden, increasing access. And so we have been working very, very hard these past 3 years, and we will continue to establish an infrastructure at USDA that is data-driven, that is evidence-driven, right? And so that no matter what happens, and for example, right, there, just a few weeks ago, and I think the deputy mentioned it yesterday, about making some of our programs in FSA be available for farmers to pay online. It's an equity, but really it's about like good customer service. So that's just like, it's smart, we should do that. And so that's what we're gonna focus on, right? Just those kinds of things across USDA, even recently with USDA, with a lot of sort of the SNAP and it just, and so for people to buy their food online, right? Where before we couldn't do that. And so that's huge. So that is sort of the perspective that I'm taking it, being at USDA for 10 years and understanding how the institution works and how we can do some of the things. The reality is some of the things will stop, but I do think a lot of them, the way that we structure them, will last because there's just like good things to do. So, but I want to offer Dr. Goldman the chance to provide his perspectives as well.
Great question. Full transparency. I'm a third generation farmer. I'm new to USDA. This is going on 4 years now. Since I've been down there, I don't want to insult anyone. I heard a new term, border buttermilk. I actually had some. It's pretty good. I'll say border buttermilk and voting rights as an example. Border buttermilk is alcoholic drink. It's a margarita, right? And they're pretty good, right? There was a time when alcohol was prohibited from being sold in the U.S. I enjoy a nice drink after a long day. Can you imagine the backlash that would happen if we said, okay, we're going to ban alcohol sales in the U.S.? That would be one hell of a backlash. Voting rights. There was a time when only men, white men who own land, could vote in the U.S. Can you imagine that if we tried to revert back to that now, and people of color and women were disbarred from voting? Can you imagine the backlash? I use those examples to admit the USDA, we can't do this alone. We have to get enough people to yes, so that when those programs are taken away, when those opportunities and those services are taken away, there will be one hell of a backlash from the agricultural public that we're bound to serve. I think that's the way I think about this when I start thinking about sustainability. It's doing that. And I see this as an important step in getting us closer to that very situation where when people now have had access to SNAP benefits like they've never had before, when farm workers actually get more of the benefits that are designated for them, when our programs and services are equitable to the point that we don't have disparities in who gets a loan and who doesn't, I think that's what's going to be required to make this work more permanent, because then we'll have a larger percentage of our agricultural public that will develop an outcry if we try and take those away. And that's what this is about. So when you hear us speaking, you'll pick up. I'll admit it. I'm 60. I'm probably I have undoubtedly lived longer than I will live, right? So there's a certain urgency to this equity. I want to see some of these things come to fruition while I'm still on this side, right? And so there's an urgency that you'll hear about what we need to do, those things that we need to do to establish the kind of permanency that will create that backlash that's going to be necessary for these things to be truly sustainable.
I also wanted to have a crack at it from my point of view. In Puerto Rico, for you guys to have a better context of what I do, I'm a planner. I'm a city planner turned community planner. So the information on how communities interact with different agencies, I've been very involved in that process since Maria in 2017 in Puerto Rico. Actually, my first visit to Rio Grande Valley was in 2018, learning how communities, especially colonias, interact with FEMA and HUD and the funding available for post-disaster funding. So organizations like Lupe are there watching that unfold. So as a planner, equity and sustainability are key, are our north on everything we do. So when I have to synthesize the takeaways from this experience of the Equity Commission, is that going to the questions from the young farmers, which has also have representation through SARA in Puerto Rico. So going to that question, I think that this process of the USDA opening itself to let people that haven't had access not only to programs, but how the agency works in general, it's a first step that I'm sure, and I'm very hopeful that it will lead towards equity, because it lets people like me, advocates, navigate through it, and I'm doing that. So when I go back home, what I install in people's minds is not just the access to funding, is what is the project that one of the things that later on is going to be enabled by their effort is the funding. But at the same time, equity is much more than that. So in Puerto Rico, the outcome of how this work is viewed, not only in the huge issue of the transition from NAP to SNAP, but also in a sense that programs like, for example, RPN, Rural Partners Network, has been implemented, helps a lot people not only get access to our programs, but to make the brainstorm needed to organize themselves into an entrepreneur mindset to start things that weren't just or haven't been able to the day because of different requirements, especially the reimbursement requirements to get access to the funding. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna finish up.
Well, Thank you so. We are out of time, but what you can all do is you can all have your questions after this and have dinner with the members, ask them questions today or tomorrow. We are out of time, and so with that, I just want to thank all of you and thank the audience for joining us. And there's going to be a QR code for you to take a very, very quick survey. And then our next national regional equity convening is going to be in Georgia. And there's more information there in case you are interested or on our website. And so with that, thank you so much. Yes, is that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more little piece with respect to the sustainability. You know, this work that the Equity Commission has done is not just a one and done. It's an ongoing thing. And I also just wanted to add that there are other advisory committees that you can lend your voice to and you can apply to be a part of, whether that's the Minority Farmers Advisory Committee or the Beginning Farmers Advisory Committee. And I know we have one of our members from our Minority Farmers Advisory Committee here, but being engaged, don't let it just stop with this. You are part of the solution. And I just want to offer that because USDA has hundreds of opportunities for that, and don't self-select yourself out of these opportunities. Just be engaged in that. And I just thank you.
No, thank you. And with that, actually, yeah, who are the USDA leaders that are here? Can you please stand up so that you so that we know who you are as you all have questions? There you go. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much.